Hello and welcome to the Klassiki Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Goff. Klassiki is your window into the world of Eastern European film. Subscribers gain access to our library of classic and contemporary films, as well as filmmaker interviews, video introductions, program notes, and much more. You can sign up for a free trial today at klassiki.online. And if you enjoy the show, don't forget to subscribe in your podcast app and leave us a review and a 5-star rating. Thank you. This week, I'm speaking with the Belarusian filmmaker Mara Tamkowicz. In 2020, Belarus was rocked by mass protests following fraudulent presidential elections that returned autocratic leader Alexander Lukashenko to power. Mara's new feature film, Under the Grey Sky, is based on the true story of a journalist named Katerina Andreeva, who was arrested and charged with treason for broadcasting police brutality against protesters. We follow the struggles of her fictionalized counterpart, Lena, and her husband as they deal with the aftermath of her detention and the moral and emotional challenges it presents. Under the Grey Sky is screening in cities across the UK as part of the touring programme of this year's Kinoteka Polish Film Festival in partnership with Klassiki. And ahead of that tour, I sat down with Mara to discuss the real-life events behind her film and to try and shed light on the situation in Belarus, a country in the grip of a brutal regime and one that remains party to the war in Ukraine, but which is too often absent from conversations about the region. Make sure to check out the links in the show description to find out more about screenings of Under the Grey Sky at this year's Kinoteka Film Festival, both in London and on tour throughout the UK. Mara, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So your film, Under the Grey Sky, is based on the real story of a Belarusian journalist called Katerina Andreeva, who is currently in prison in Belarus for her journalistic activities during the protests in 2020 following the rigged presidential election in that year. So could you just briefly tell us a little bit about the true story, the real person, Katerina, and what happened to her?
So Katerina was a journalist for Belsat TV, for a television that is broadcasting from Poland to deliver Belarusian uncensored information. And around 3 months into the protest, she was broadcasting from an apartment. I'll make a little detour here. Why from the apartment? That's important because back then in 2020, the authorities did all they could to stop any sort of information, any sort of images from getting out on the internet, on the TV. So basically they cut off all the mobile internet in the country right after the presidential elections for 3 days. And then every time the big protest came up, they just blocked the internet connection in the area. Also for using, there was no way of, like when you say a TV transmission, people imagine there's big cars and a very professional, setup, but that could not be done in Belarus. 3 months into the protest, basically what journalists did was either film the material during the protest and then finding a spot with a landline connection for the internet and trying to send the material over to the base here in Warsaw. Usually it was done by getting access to private Wi-Fi, like home Wi-Fi of someone, arranged, among the activists, among just the people who took part in protest, among the people who were sympathetic to the protest, just like, connecting, coming close to the building, connecting to it and sending the material right away. Or they had to find a safe spot, a relatively safe spot with a stable landline connection.
Right.
This is how private apartments came into all of this. The editors were looking, the producers were looking for these apartments with good overview over the main spots for the protest, and then tried to arrange for the journalists to come and transmit from there and comment from there. So On November 15th, Katerina Andreeva and her camera woman, Daria Chultsova, went into a private apartment like that, overlooking the yard, which was known by the name of the Square of Changes, because of the graffiti which appeared there and was repainted again and then appeared again and repainted again by the authorities, because huge involvement of people who lived there in the protest. It sort of became a symbol. And just a few days earlier, one of the people who lived there was actually the one painting this graffiti. He went out of his home, trying to stop plain this is the word.
Plain clothes.
Plain
Policemen.
clothes, yeah. Plain clothes policemen, who were tearing the white ribbons. So you imagine it's just an empty yard. There are several people downstairs, and the person who lives in this house, he comes down to the yard and tries to talk to them, like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? He was arrested. He was grabbed and dragged into a car, and that was the last anyone has saw him alive, or at least alive and conscious. He reappeared in the hospital the next day, and he died never regaining consciousness. He was so badly beaten by the people who arrested him. So the protest Katerina was showing was the protest of anger, of resilience, of despair after this brutal murder that happened just in someone's yard. And during this transmission, I think at this time we are in 99th day of the protest. The authorities were really like trying to get the journalists who are still showing what's happening. So they send out the drones to look for the points where transmission is being held.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, this is how they found the girls in the apartment, and they blocked the area. They cut off the landline. They also cut off precisely their mobile phones, so they have no connection to the outside world. And this is how the long imprisonment for Katerina Andreeva began.
And she's currently serving, I think it's an 8-year sentence.
8 years and 3 months, yes. It's a result of combined sentences after 2 trials, actually. And she's like midway of the sentence a little bit.
So how did you decide to take this story and to transform it into a film? You originally made a short film based just around the kind of moments of Katerina's arrest called Live, which was a fantastic short film. I remember watching it when it was screening. And now you've kind of worked it into this longer feature, which then which starts with the scene of the arrest and then follows the long kind of legal procedural aftermath of it. So how did you decide to and then go about kind of adapting this story? Because it must be difficult to treat the story with the kind of respect that it requires for these real people.
Well, I used to be a journalist myself, and I used to work for Belsat TV years ago. And my husband was actually the one who was looking for those spots to pass the info. He was organizing this network of places where the journalist can work. He works for Belsat TV as of today as well. So the starting point was a combination of that. Obviously, the perspective of the journalist is something that is close to me. What happens in Belarus is also obviously something that is close to me. I've been living in Poland for almost 20 years now, but I came to Poland because of the protests, like after the protests against the rigged elections, which was overtaken by the very same person in 2006. So this, and my dad used to be, my dad was an independent journalist as well. So it's a very strong connection there.
Mm.
And living abroad in 2020, when the protest was happening and the repressions were happening, and all those huge prison terms, which we look at now and think, oh, well, 2 years back then, they were lucky. This is how the situation has changed. For me, it was a moment of despair. It was a moment of helplessness and of feeling, like useless. And then this story happens, and the opportunity presented to make a short film, and I was like, what can it be? This is what it has to be. And I tried to portray the emotion that the whole nation had back then through these two girls locked in the apartment and making the decisions that will affect their whole life in just a spare of the second. And after that, my producer with whom I worked on a completely different story for a feature film, he watched the short film. He was like, "It has to be this. We have to be working on this. Why are we doing this other thing at this point?" And it actually took a little while to find, what the feature will be actually about, because although it depicts same characters in a way, those two are very different stories. If the first one is very thriller-like, short moment of this decision and of this protest atmosphere, the second one focuses more, the feature one, Under the Gray Sky, it focuses more on the aftermath and on the price you have to pay and on the way you're led to make those decisions in a very different way along the way, So it's basically the story starts where the cameras go off and there are just these two people, the lead, Lena, who's inspired by Katya, and then her husband, and the questions, what do we do now? What I was going for in the film, in a way, was also, showing through the lives of these two people, of these two characters, the way that the whole nation descended into absolute terror and chaos in these several years. And although we're very close to the characters and it's a love story, I always say that, but somewhere on the background, on the meta level, you can see what happened to the whole country through these particular lives.
So, like you say, the character who we spend most of the film with is Lena, the name of the journalist in this fictionalized version of the story. It's her husband, because Lena is arrested early in the film, and then we see her briefly after that, and then really we're staying with her husband, who remains, well, he is also arrested at a certain point, but who remains on the outside of the prison and then is going through these procedures, trying to kind of deal with the aftermath. As I understand it, Igor Ilyash, the husband of the real Katerina, is still in Belarus. Is that right? So were you talking to him, because you have another character, presumably also based on another real person here in the figure of the husband? Was the real life husband involved somehow in constructing that story?
Yes, Igor was a great help into providing insights in the way, they thought, they planned, they made the decisions in what happened that day, in the way he had to deal with what happened next. Also in his decision to stay in Belarus, which has not only caused him detentions and administrative arrests throughout the years, but he has been arrested again in October of 2024, and this time he was charged with criminal charges. We're not clear what they are, because this is one more way the Belarusian authorities are going these days. They force the lawyers to sign non-disclosure agreements. So basically no one knows exactly what is he accused of. So he's also now in prison, and he's going on trial, I think, around in February this month. Yes.
The story keeps going. I think the film was extremely striking and extremely powerful, precisely because of the ways that it avoids, I think, what we might call the kind of cliches or the tropes, I think, of activist stories. It's obviously a film about a kind of moral bravery, and there is a huge amount of tension and drama, but it's actually a very quiet film. It's a film that largely takes place in these kind of unprepossessing interiors. It's a film about meeting a lawyer and questioning kind of legal processes and kind of talking on the phone. It's a very subdued tone, despite the high stakes of what's happening. Could you just tell us a little bit about how you go about turning the kind of quiet, difficult, dry reality of what it's actually like to be in that situation? How do you go about turning that into drama, into fiction? Because there is this process of fictionalization of artistic license going on.
Well, like you said, when you hear it's a story about the journalist who was portraying, who's showing the protest, and then she got arrested, and then what do you imagine? You imagine brutal scenes outside, the
Mm,
protest, the smoke, and then the prison, and what happens in prison, the violence, and so on. That felt like a very obvious thing to show, like we've seen it hundreds of times. Of course, you feel differently when it happens to you, but as an audience, you are sort of expecting that. You're expecting you're gonna be taken into this area, and there the decisions seem, like very obvious how to deal with it. And I was really trying to avoid that. What I was trying to understand and where I was trying to go to in the film was, how do real people make the decisions that then seem heroic to us? Because it's like all this, monumental narration about the activists and journalists and people who take part in protests. This is just one thing. But then
mm,
behind that, on day-to-day basis, there is something you have to deal with. And this was the area that interested me the most. And also, in my conversations with Igor, I was trying to find as human reasons for what they were doing as possible, and to stay away from loud words and loudness in general in this film. It's a film about love and acceptance, which comes at a price. It's also a film about the choice that, like, you're not happy to make this choice. It's not
mm.
about being this hero who is running to die in the front row of the
Right.
war.
Yeah.
It's not like that. It's about the thing that you went through in an event, and you did every little step right. And somehow you end up in this situation where there is no going back. And now you're facing this huge choice. And you would give everything not to make this choice, like just to land in a different moment somewhere. But there is no turning back. And now you have to go there and make this choice, which will seem then brave and heroic for people outside. But how does it feel making this choice? This was something I was trying, to find. And this is particularly the reason we did not go into, we stay with him, with
Yeah.
his perspective, and we don't go inside, because he has more options, and this side, is less seen.
It's interesting you mentioned that idea of loudness, because I think it's really striking how much of the film is sitting with the husband in silence. It's just observing him silently thinking, and we get such an access into what he's going through, but with very few words. It's really kind of striking. It's really compelling performance from Valentin Novopolsky, the actor who plays the husband. It's a really amazing performance. I read that you had some trouble kind of casting that role. I guess not easy to find Belarusian actors uh, outside of Belarus are able to work. So could you just tell us a little bit about how you found Valentin, and how you went about directing this very kind of quiet and reserved performance from him?
Well, finding him was a challenge because, first of all, I went obviously for Belarusian actors working in exile in Poland or somewhere around Poland, maybe in Lithuania. And then this pool of choice, it's getting smaller and smaller because you have to choose only from those who are in Poland or Lithuania. You have to have someone right age. You have to have someone who will agree to take part in this project, because even if you are living abroad, you still might be going to Belarus. You might have family in Belarus,
Right,
and
yeah.
taking part in this film meant, a definite block on returning to the country in foreseeable future. And it was extremely challenging. At some point, my producer suggested that we open up the search for non-Belarusian actors and try to look around, maybe try out Ukrainian actors or someone who would speak Russian. And then I remember this guy I met at the festival years ago, when I was touring with my short film daughter. It was an art film fest, Košice, and he was there with his debut film, Oleg. And I remember watching this film and feeling like this is the most organic and minimalistic performance, which is at the same time so true and compelling, that I've seen in years. And I texted him 5 years after, we had our last conversation, and we've known each other for 2 days briefly at the festival, you can say. And I asked him, will you do that? And yeah, I'm really happy. I'm really happy that he took on this risk. We had to work on a very tight, schedule, and on the very tight limitations due to the budget. But I think that what he was able to bring to the film, this inner struggle that is in his eyes, that very, organic, as I said, natural, minimalistic, but also very emotional way through what Ilya is feeling in the film.
Yeah, it's a really, like I said, it's a really amazing performance, and it's so, like you said, minimal and naturalistic, doing so much with seemingly so little. But that kind of fits with the whole tenor of the film. It's real serendipity that you remembered this guy in your contacts from 5 years earlier. I did want to talk to you while we have the chance about the Belarusian situation more broadly, if you don't mind, because I always think that it's a kind of forgotten, or to Western eyes maybe invisible, partner in this, or kind of actor in this ongoing crisis, in Ukraine and in with Russia as well. It's obviously, Lukashenko and the regime is a kind of active participant in the war on Ukraine, and it's deeply implicated. But I think since the kind of the protests in 2020, since they were kind of put down by the regime, I think maybe it slipped out of people's minds or vision here in the West, and I think it's really important that attention is kind of brought back onto Belarus, and also, we're a film platform, we're talking about film, onto Belarusian film. So, like you say, you've been based in Poland for almost 2 decades now. So obviously your situation is distinct. But if we want to start with just the basic question about the kind of the state of film in Belarus today, and the kind of the challenges facing Belarusian filmmakers, where would we begin? I mean, it's extremely challenging for anyone who's left in Belarus. Obviously, that goes without saying.
Well, starting maybe with a general background, what you have to know is that today Belarus has been turned into just like gulag sized, like the
Mm.
gulag, which is the size of a country. The repressions and pressure on any kind of, disobedience and disagreement, that can be even done by liking a wrong comment on the Facebook, or texting a wrong person, or having a wrong picture found somewhere in the archives. Really, what you can go to prison for in Belarus now, is just unpredictable. Everything can be a crime. And the authorities go further and further by adding more and more, not only media to the extremist list, but also like private Facebook pages, Instagram accounts, everything that they see as some sort of a threat for the narrative. The propaganda gets everywhere as well. It puts pressure on, on all the media, obviously, but also on lifestyle bloggers. It's everywhere. This narrative of Russian world, of this unity of pro-war narrative, and at the same time, very hardcore persecution of everyone who disagrees in any way or disobeys in any way. And as for my story, the journalist Katerina Andreeva is in prison, but the camera woman, Daria Chultsova, she served her 2 years term and then she got out and left Belarus. So, it's a constant mill of new and new and new people who get in the prison system, who get in this repression cycle. This results on how any sort of artistic activity functions in Belarus. So obviously the state funding is reserved for highly propagandistic productions with strong pro-war, anti-European, anti-democratic narratives. As for independent filmmaking, so those who remained in Belarus had to go deeply underground. So it's basically like very, very, very underground filming that people do, taking great risks while shooting and then while showing the film. So obviously without any access to financing instruments or to the equipment, to more public locations, it's very, very challenging. But a lot of filmmakers left Belarus and landed in various countries. The most of them came here to Poland and are trying to work, in this new reality. But it's extremely challenging because when you have no country, no support from the country you come from, it's very difficult in the industry to collect money. Because if you come to Western, to European partners and give them a story and say like, hi, this is my project, they ask you, well, great, we would love to do the minority co-production with you. Do you have your home country's financing secured? And then, the circle continues because they're like, we don't, but they're like, yeah, it's a Belarusian story. It's a very tricky situation. It's a very tricky situation. Also because in Europe, but I think not only in Europe, it's very hard to remind people. And so thank you for this conversation, that not everything that is Belarusian is Lukashenkist, is from regime. The cancel culture, which struck hard after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began, was targeted against the state entities, obviously, and this state Belarus, but it also backfired on independent filmmakers. And sometimes we have to face the situation where when the festivals exclude not Belarusian productions, but Belarusian filmmakers, Belarusian narratives, and Belarusian stories at all, without, like going into detail. Is it about like what kind of filmmaker is it, on which side he is, and this need to position ourselves at a certain side in this conflict, at a certain side of this, split of the values, was actually the beginning of creating of Belarusian Independent Film Academy. I'm a member of this organization, and we try to unite the filmmakers who work abroad or who secretly work in the country, but who have a strong anti-war and anti-regime standing.
So I'm glad you raised there the Independent Belarusian Film Academy, which, like you say, is this organization that is attempting to support the now kind of dispersed and in some cases underground independent Belarusian film community. I remember a couple of years ago, shortly after the academy had been founded, I spoke to one of its founding members, Andrei Kutsila, And he was obviously speaking from exile at that point, and he spoke quite movingly about what it's like to attempt to construct that kind of community whilst also living in a state of exile. Obviously, like you say, you've been living in Poland for 20 years, so it's not as immediate an experience for you. But could you maybe give our listeners some kind of sense of what it's like for this new wave of Belarusian filmmakers who are now finding themselves stuck outside, unwillingly stuck outside of the country, and how they're trying to go about creating that sense of community?
Well, I think that experience of exile itself, whether it touches on, filmmakers or people of any other profession, has this common ground, because you have your place, you have your career, you have your network, you have your connections, you have your achievements that are recognized in a certain field of operation. You know your way around this field, and then all of that just gets cut out abruptly,
Mm.
and you're moved to an unfamiliar reality very suddenly, in a country where you do not speak the language, in a country where you have to resettle all your day-to-day life, like look for an apartment, find a job that will support you while you look around, and all that. And you have to navigate a very different system, and at the same time, a very competitive system, which strongly relies of previously formed connections and
Right.
on, certain ways. You need to know people in film
Yeah,
industry to
it's not
function
like being an independent filmmaker is easy in the first place.
anywhere. Yes. And then you come to a place where you know no one knows you. And a lot of Belarusian filmmakers, they come here, they ask me, how do I do that? How do I get into industry? And I don't have an answer. I'm telling them that,
You need a time
you
machine.
will not, yeah, you will not like what I'm gonna tell you. But like, if you have 10 years, then
Mm.
I have a plan for you. It's very hard. And then you try to, you don't have a Polish citizenship, and you try to convince producers you worth the risk. And then you also telling them the story that they do not quite understand. I mean, it's very, very challenging, of course. Well, Under the Gray Sky was sort of the first film that was done on Belarusian topic, the first feature film that was done on Belarusian topic outside of Belarus, especially regarding the topic of on the Belarusian protest. And for Poland, it was also sort of a risk that the producers decided to took on the film that will not be in Polish, that will not be acted by Polish actors, it will not have Polish stars. It will tell a story from somewhere else, and at the same time, it will function as a Polish film. And I think it worked out. It worked out for us. We were a micro-budget production, a specific slot in Polish Film Institute. And despite that, despite a very limiting budget, we ended up premiering at Tribeca. We ended up winning the Best Debut Award at Gdynia Film Festival. So now I try to underline this potential of mutually beneficial cooperation
Mm.
between local producers and the talent who came here from Belarus, and try to, build this perspective of newcomers, not as a threat, not as like something or a problem, but probably of an opportunity to expanding the narrative here in Poland. And this is what the Academy does. We are just a group of film professionals who united and try to advocate for Belarusian stories in the cinema, and Belarusian cinema in terms of, message, narrative, some value set that we would like to promote, and get some visibility and build the distance between the regime propaganda stuff they are throwing at people now and what the independent filmmakers have to say. I strongly believe that this voice really matters, because we are at the point when the political diplomacy is at impasse. This is a very stuck situation. We can't go anywhere much. But cultural diplomacy, especially through film that has such a huge potential for large audience, for strong involvement, and for reaching out to those who did not previously engage in this kind of narratives. This film is always a starting point for the conversation about what's happening in Belarus, and their understanding of the situation is very vague. So.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, but then you said it much more eloquently yourself, that that point is especially true when it's the case of the country which, for whatever reason, the reasons are long standing, is so ignored, basically, or so poorly known and understood. I mean, but like you say, this is the first Belarusian story told in a kind of feature film format outside of Belarus, and that's going to have to be the future for the foreseeable future. So it's like, we're really kind of it's a difficult but also maybe an exciting point to be at, maybe at the beginning of a new stage in Belarusian filmmaking. And it's interesting what you say about trying to get, in your instance, kind of Polish partners on board, because there is this interesting phenomenon, and obviously these situations are different between kind of Belarusian and Ukrainian or even Russian filmmakers, but there are these kind of partnerships starting to happen as filmmakers in exile or who are refugees, basically leaving countries like Belarus and Ukraine, moving to countries like Poland, are starting to collaborate, if you like. I mean, your film is made with Polish Film Institute. Another film that we've talked about on this podcast, Under the Volcano by Damian Kotzor, that's he's a Polish director, but it's a film made with Ukrainian artists about the Ukraine war and the Ukrainian situation. So there is maybe a kind of the green shoots of some kind of new collaborative culture, but it's going to be a long journey to get that, especially with all the kind of financial issues that kind of film.
Well, I think faces. I can split it into two separate issues, I guess. The first one is that the situation of Belarusian filmmakers in exile and the situation of Ukrainian filmmakers, they are very different.
Sure. I wasn't attempting.
I mean, in terms of, you have this huge support for Ukrainian stories, narratives, and the special programs. I don't question the need for that. Absolutely. But the moral situation there with Ukrainian filmmakers is very clear for the potential partners outside Ukraine. This is the nation that suffers under unimaginable aggression of Russia, and they deserve our help and support. And this is a clear narrative. With Belarusian filmmakers, Belarus is an ally of Putin in conducting this aggression. So this is a no-go when you hear the word Belarus. They hear the word Belarus. People don't want to go into like what kind of filmmaker, what kind of film, what kind of Belarusian something. It's like, no, that's Putin's something. And by doing that, we're just giving away the whole nation and the whole country to Putin. Because if Belarusian filmmakers who are willing to risk a lot, really risk a lot, by making the films and by making their anti-regime statements. I have this example of my friend and colleague, Andriy Kashpersky. He's a film director from Belarus who moved here in Poland, and he has done a 4-episode novella film, anti-dictatorship satire of a sort. So he is now wanted not only in Belarus, but also in all systems in Russia. So like one half of the world, which has agreements with Belarus, is cut out for him. It's not like he's not safe in Belarus. He also needs to check every time he goes somewhere whether this country has a treaty, is he on the wanted list? And he's there only for making the film. So it's it's trickier with advocating for Belarusian narratives, but at the same time, I think very, very, very important. But to end it on a more optimistic kind of message, what I observe in per se Polish cinema, coming from a very difficult situation, we yet come to a place that sort of forces collaborations and co-productions. You sort of go and look, especially for artistic films that are intended, first of all, for the festivals and then for theatrical release. You try to form this pan-national cooperations and co-produce it. I think that this borders, this, limitations, this national identities get more and more mixed in terms of the pan-European cinematic process, and this is a chance for like Belarusian narratives and from the narratives from smaller worlds, because at the end of it has to be a great and moving story to make a film the one you want to see, right? And it has to lead you into an unknown world and introduce you to something you have never seen. And Belarusian stories have a great potential for that, because it's just like terra incognita in contemporary filmmaking.
Well, thank you for finding that positive note to end on, because there was a lot of very difficult subject matter there, but you're right that it's important to look for the positive, and I think it's fantastic that your film is going to be touring the UK, and strongly advise everyone listening, check out the Kinoteka touring program, see if Under the Grey Skies is screening in a city near you, and go and see it, because it's a really fantastic film and a very necessary film. Mara Tomkovic, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you so much for having me. And I wanted to add that I will be there for the London screening of the 25th of March.
Aha.
So it's a story, because the 25th of March is actually the most important holiday for independent Belarusians. It's the Freedom Day, which is not recognized by the authority, but is widely celebrated by pro-democratic people. So I'm very glad it happened to have to be the 25th of March that the screening in London will be held.
Well, we'll see you there, 25th of March in London. Mara Tomkovic, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.